Hey everybody.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
Pretty good. Another fine Saturday.
Yeah, today's the functions day. We'll talk.
Today is your favorite day.
It's my favorite day. We'll talk a lot about what functions are, what cloud functions are in Firebase. It's gonna be exciting. We have so much stuff to cover. I don't even know. Like we just need to go. I think.
I think we just need to go. We're also going to talk about extensions for the first time, and I think that the extensions are really, really cool part about Firebase too.
Exactly. Like it allows you to just like plug your functions into your code base and you do nothing. We'll look at that as we go. Before we start, as always, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, or there's also our Discord, Think Outside the Valley. If you have any problems with the code or you need any guidance, we're always free to help. Just ping us. There's a special Firebase chat available for you, so just drop your questions there. We're happy to help anytime. Yeah, Dalton, if you can drop the invite to the Discord server in the comments, that would be nice. All right. Without any further ado, let's just go. I'm going to present. All right. You're gonna bear with my connection because everything will be quite slow this time. But let's see. Intermediate Firebase, we're going into cloud functions. Let's talk about what are we going to be covering today. What are the topics for this event? So first of all, we're going to kind of have a high-level overview of what cloud functions are. Why would you use them? Why do you need them? It's not something like regular that you use in your code bases day to day, and like also not to confuse with your regular functions. Cloud functions are actually some standalone pieces of code that run on your on the cloud. We'll also talk a bit about NPM and Node.js because that's the environment where the functions run. And I'm gonna go and like do some live coding to show you what that all is about, because we didn't touch NPM and Node.js before, unless if you recall when we were installing Firebase tools, well, we were using NPM to do that. One of the options was using NPM. After the live demo, we're going to go into different types of functions because functions could be triggered with multiple things. You could use analytics as covered in the previous events. You could use just HTTPS to trigger them. Basically anything, right? So we'll cover what different options you have and how to trigger your functions and run them. I'm going to show some examples, some code samples, and we will go over the code in our application in our e-commerce websites and actually show the use cases of those functions in our code. So yeah, what are cloud functions? Let's kind of excuse me. Let's kind of have an overview of what it is. So basically, what it allows you to do is to run JavaScript in your in the cloud, and the way it does that is with basically like creating a small container in the cloud, running your function, executing it, and then shutting down the container. You can trigger the functions that, as I said, you can trigger them with different events. Either that's an HTTP request, or it could be basically anything. And then yeah, you can like run your backend code without managing any servers, because you will see how easy it is to deploy your functions. It's literally one line of code. Then you can look for the logs when your functions are fired, and we'll see all that in action as we go. But just a high-level idea of what cloud functions are, it's you have your client code where you have your Android app or your web app. And then cloud functions are standalone pieces of code that you manage on the cloud that run in independent environment from your application. It allows you to like kind of atomize your development into different sectors, especially if they're not relevant one to another.
I think one thing that might be interesting to mention, at least I found this quite interesting, is that Cloud Functions is actually an extension of the Cloud Run platform on
Exactly,
GCP. And essentially, it's just a a containerization service with some load balancing, and it's some really neat technology.
Yeah, actually, yeah, Raf, you mentioned this to me before the event. Like, Cloud Functions are so popular, we don't even know what kind of is inside. But actually, what Google Cloud did, they took these services that already exist. They're probably less popular. They created a new service which is much more powerful, that allows you to run your codes on a server, on an independent machine, on the clouds in seconds, right? Like, that's very powerful, and it utilizes different components within it. And you don't even think of what does it have on the back end, what does it use. It was kind of interesting to learn that, yeah.
And I think one of the biggest advantages is you get charged per time that the operation takes. So for the time it takes to start up the system, run the computation, and then close it. And that's why you can get these Cloud Functions at scale for really, really cheap, or at least reasonable prices.
Exactly, yeah. Talking about pricing, just to address the elephant in the room, Cloud Functions, you will need to have your Blaze plan to enable your Cloud Functions. Unfortunately, yes, you will need to enter your billing information, but if you use them carefully, you won't get billed. It's like, I'm going to talk about the stats on the right. You will need to use them quite extensively to get billed even a cent. So let's see. First thing you would be billed for is invocations, and you can see that it's like 2 million a month before you get billed anything. So
it's reasonable.
It's reasonable, right? Like, there's a free tier for every section here. So there's gigabyte seconds. That's what Raf was talking about, is how much memory your function uses in how much time. CPU seconds, outbound networking, how many requests your function makes. Different kind of, unless you're doing something like very specific and very, very often, I don't think you would get billed on your portfolio projects or like your smaller projects. Although if you want to scale, like, all the pricing is there. If you want to increase your bandwidth, call your functions more and kind of enable that functionality, you can definitely do that, right? Like, that's all available, and all the statistics you can see in the slides. I think it's a pretty generous free tier. At least if you want to develop some like a small to medium app, you can do it completely for free with no cents charged or anything. I think it's pretty good. By the way, everything we will be doing in this tutorial is completely free. Like, if I cannot think of something that would run outside the 2 million invocation per month, or like, yeah, any other bounds. Cool. Okay, Raf, let's kind of address the terminology and see people know these terms. So let's start. Yeah, let's start from the top. So the API, you'll hear this word a lot. Stands for Application Programming Interface. It's basically the communication layer between your client and your server, or basically any service that, like, any product provides. You'll hear this, like, I don't know, GitHub API or Slack API or what have you. It's basically like a public interface of what you can do and what data you can fetch from a service. So for GitHub API, you can list the users in your organization. There's API for that. You can call some functions. So yeah, that's the idea. Then we have HTTP.
I think in the way we're using it is predominantly going to be just a URL string. As you know, we're talking about an HTTP or an HTTPS string, and then you can pass in certain parameters and then accept those parameters whenever you wherever you are creating the API.
Yeah, exactly. So HTTP is your protocol of how basically anything functions on the web. It's the language that like programmer understands how to parse your URL string, how to retrieve some data. So it's pretty important concept to have as well. Yeah, a request is basically like anything you ask a function to do, or like you can enter URL in your URL string, and that's a request to some service that will render the HTML for you using HTTP, by the way. So it's basically all tied in, all entangled. All of these concepts you will hear a lot. If you have any questions, we can provide a more in-depth explanation, but I'm just gonna like go through these quite quickly. So NPM is something we'll hear a lot as well when we'll be showing the demo. NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and it's basically how you installed your Firebase tools. You probably executed npm install -g Firebase tools, right? That was a package. You brought it into your system using npm. So yeah, it helps you manage packages with Node.js. Emulation is another concept. We'll explore this. So you will have your production Firebase console, but then we will also spin up some emulators in our local machine. So we don't need to even talk to our production website or to the cloud. We can test our functions, or we can test our invocations, our Firestore locally, and then deploy. Right? That's very, very powerful. So you don't need to wait. You don't need to do any of that. Yeah, Raf, do you want to talk about the right side?
Yeah. So the right side is like more niche terminology that you might not hear as often, but it's really important to know what they mean. Middleware in general is sort of like a middleman between you requesting information from an API and the API accepting that information, or accepting the request at least. And so middleware is a way for you to provide headers if you ever used HTTP requests, and as well, allows you to use cores. It's really just a middleman that will essentially allow you to make the API request or to make the HTTP request. In some instances, you'll get blocked from doing these kinds of things, so you provide the correct resources that says you are who you claim to be using middleware and cores. So cores is the cross-origin resource sharing, and that's where you'll be defining what content type you have, what kind of data you're sending, what kind of data you're expecting, what the request type is, whether it's a good GET request or a PUT request or an update, those kinds of things. The next thing is cron. And cron, I think, Andrew, you and I found out yesterday, it's just a derivative of the Greek word chronos, in other words, the god for time. And so it's cron is just like a acronym that we use to describe scheduled functions. So anything that happens periodically, that's time-based. And then they have cron job schedules. And those schedules are denoted by a specific type, if you will, that explains how often the function should run. And it could be every minute, or it could be once a year. Anywhere in between that too.
Yeah, exactly. So like you will see that later on as well. If there are any Linux people in the chat, like you will probably notice like cron job concept, right? Like you can schedule some tasks, run some commands every so often. You can specify, as Raf said, you can specify any kind of granular period of time you want. From, I think, like the minimal is 1 minute, and then the maximum is like something like 1 year or something. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Once again, if you have any questions, please, we'll address them later on. So why cloud functions? Why do we need them? What are they used for? What are the use cases? Let's talk a bit about that. So as Firebase docs state, there are like the 4 use cases for Firebase functions that you would probably encounter when you develop your apps. The first one, and probably the most popular one is, or the most reasonable one, is separating your computationally heavy tasks from your client code. So if you have, I don't know, some machine learning things happening on your backend, you don't want to be performing that on the client because that's going to drain your users' batteries. It's going to perform a bunch of requests. We don't want that. So cloud functions are a very nice way of just basically separating this functionality and encapsulating that logic, right? Like you send a request to the cloud functions. I want to compute this. It's going to perform some very heavy computational stuff without, like, your client will go on with their lives and like perform some tasks on the web, on your app. And then the cloud functions will get back to you. Here's the results. So it's very neat use case as well.
I hate to stop you there in the middle of the chat, but we have a pretty interesting question. So he's asking if CORS is used to request resources from other websites to display on your website. Do you want to answer this, or should I?
I know. So to be completely honest, I don't have too much knowledge on CORS. I just know that it's something that if you have different origins, basically, right? Like you have servers accepting requests from different clients. That's where these kind of questions arise. Where should I accept my requests? Should I accept them from everywhere, or should I only filter out requests from these URLs, these IP addresses? And that's where CORS comes in. So yeah, I think if you're displaying content from one website on another website, you will go into some cross-origin issues, and you would use CORS for that to render that. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Rod?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things is that on the server side where you're creating your API, you will explicitly define some CORS attributes that need to be met in order for the API to return a successful value, a 200 request. And on the consumer side, when you are accessing the API, you will then specify your own parameters, and then once it makes the API call, it will see if they match. So for example, in your server, you could define your CORS to only accept, a list of maybe 20 IP addresses. Say, for example, you only want your server to be accessible by your friends, and you've got a list of their IPs. Then within your client side, when you're actually calling the API, you can specify your IP address, and then when they meet, it will determine whether or not it's a successful operation. And this is just one example. I mean, I'm also myself not an expert on CORS, but I just know that it's a way to be able to block unwanted usage, and then also for a way to have clients validate their usage.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question. If you have anything else, please ask away. The second use case for cloud functions is DB maintenance, and we're more looking at Cloud Firestore. If you haven't watched our 2 Firestore events, you should definitely check them out. But if you recall, in the second one, we were kind of doing this pagination idea where we needed to load more documents when we reached a certain amount of documents on the page. And then we needed to stop when all of the documents in the collections are already rendered. How do we know how many documents are they in the collection? Because Cloud Firestore doesn't provide you an easy way to know that without performing a bunch of reads. So we'll see a use case for this with using a Cloud Functions. We'll write a kind of an aggregator Cloud Function to count the number of documents in your collection and store that as a property on some other documents. So that's a perfect use case for some database maintenance. Another example is also synchronizing your documents across the collections, because Cloud Firestore is an OSQL database, and you don't have your references all over the place like in SQL databases. You don't have your IDs everywhere and references to some documents. You need to kind of sync those together and make sure they're in, they match their versions between different collections, and we'll see how to do that as well. Yeah, Raf, do you want to talk about the last two here?
Yeah, so another really great use case of Cloud Functions is that you can access some of these external services that are provided by, for example, GitHub or Slack. You could run, if you're on GitHub, for instance, you could have a trigger on your website that will merge all pull requests or maybe create a new issue. The same thing is true on Slack. You could have certain webhooks to tie into Slack on your dashboard application. That's true for almost any API. You can access, this is something that I found out, is that sometimes it's not possible to access unsecure websites like HTTP websites from a secure front end. So Firebase being a secure front end, your website will be secured. That's why you have a little gray lock. We spoke about this in authentication. And it's going to create issues when you try and access unsecure APIs. But what you could do is have those APIs be accessed through your Cloud Functions and then use your Cloud Function within your front end. I know that it is a gateway. You have to do like 2 steps to get to one, but it is a solution that I've found fairly useful. And then the last one, and this is possibly my favorite one, is the ability to send users some notifications. And we are using today a Firebase extension to do this, the send email extension. But you can also use FCM, the Firebase Cloud Messaging. If you've got Android or iOS users, you can send them notifications quite easily the exact same way.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to include that into like a web tutorial because you rarely send notifications on your web apps. But yeah, for Android users, for iOS users, anybody who's building native applications, this will be like a huge thing, right? You want your push notifications, you want your traction to your app constantly, and Cloud Functions is a perfect use case for this.
And I think, it is possible to do Firebase Cloud Messaging on a desktop application.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to find a great use case for it where an email wouldn't be sufficient. But if you are, maybe building a real-time chat application, a desktop application, like Slack, for instance, I think would be a good example, or maybe even Discord, then maybe you would want to have like, your native operating system notifications be popping up. But usually emails would get the job done for most things, on a website at least.
All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about Node.js and NPM for a sec, because yeah, these are relatively new concepts. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, but just to reiterate, when you deploy your Cloud Function to the cloud, it will run in a Node environment. And what that means is that you will be able to write JavaScript that runs on the cloud, not in the web browser. It's a little bit different, has its own caveats. We will use NPM, the Node package manager, to manage dependencies, include different libraries, different, for example, the admin package for Firebase to basically like go into the Firestore database and change something in your functions. You need a package for that. So how do you do it? You install it with NPM. We'll look at the examples here. All you need to know at this point is that your bits of code, your different small functions that you define, or big ones, they're going to be packaged up into this kind of Node shell and then run on the cloud and executed there. So yeah, just to let you know.
I think one other thing that's at least useful to mention is that these Cloud Functions can sometimes take maybe up to a minute or two to instantiate if they haven't been accessed in a while. And I think this is known as a cold start. Because it's a containerized function, it actually has to spin up the container and instantiate the resources, install all the necessary dependencies, and then your NPM package, and then run your code. That cold start will sometimes be a little bit longer than if you've used that function a few times in the last day, week even. It would be a lot quicker thereafter. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, the functions actually get faster over time.
Yeah, I assume as more requests come to them, there's some caching going on where it speeds up the invocation. Yeah, good point, Jeff. Thanks. So this is what our pipeline is going to look like from writing the code to watching our function succeed on the on our Firebase console. So first thing, you're going to write some codes, decide what trigger you're going to use, decide what your Cloud Functions needs to do, and then emulate the function on your client side, test it, run it with whatever services you need, and then deploy it to Firebase. So that's your kind of step-by-step tutorial of how to deploy a Cloud Function to your console. I have a question here. So does Yarn do the same thing as an NPM? Perfect question. Yes, Yarn and NPM are two kind of Node package manager options that you have. The only, like, Yarn is perfectly fine to use with this setup as well, but the only caveat is that we will see that there is going to be some code generated for you. And by default, Cloud Functions use NPM configuration. So if you want to use Yarn, you can completely do that perfectly fine, but you will need to change some configuration to make some commands work for you. Otherwise, yeah, they are pretty much equivalent. Cool. Yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. I think this is a good place to show some code and show what this actually is in practice. So let me do some live coding, and hopefully it won't go terribly wrong. All right. So can you see the font well? I hope it's large enough.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's all good. So right now you can see that I'm on the Event 5 Analytics branch. This is a branch from last week. By the way, all the code for this event will be on Event 6-Functions branch, which is like a starter code for this event. But I'm intentionally on the wrong branch. I'm intentionally on the last week's branch because the reason being because it doesn't have any functions references at all. So I want to walk you through how to add functions to your environment, to your existing app, initialize everything, and have them running. So let's see. Let me just actually let me do a git reset just to make sure that everything is clean. Hope I might actually check out another one just to make sure there's nothing here, because I see this functions folder. I don't really like it. I'm gonna check out develop. Oh, right, because we're...
Yeah, so I think we've included the functions in, we've already included the functions with the analytics branch and the develop branch.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we could do is straight off of the last week's episode, our cart functionality, the analytics, we can make a new branch off there as well.
I'm just gonna delete the functions folder and we're gonna go.
That works too.
That I think that's gonna be fine. This will take a while because there are a lot of modules in there, so bear with me. Cool. Okay, functions are gone. So first thing you want to do is actually to initialize your functions. You want to run, considering you have, given you have the Firebase tools installed, which we have a separate video on how to install those, but you should have this Firebase commands in your console. So I'm going to say Firebase init, and then what do I want to initialize? I want to initialize functions here. So bear with my computer, but this should prompt me to initialize some function setup. it's going to ask me what do I want to use, JavaScript or TypeScript. For this example, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use JavaScript because that's just simpler. Do I want to use ESLint? ESLint is like a linting module that helps you manage your code and prettify it. I don't want to deal with that right now, so I'm going to say no. And here's the important one. It's going to ask you to install dependencies right away. No reason why I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to say yes. But in case you said no for some reason, I'm going to show what to do in that option. So while this is running, I'm going to kind of expand this folder and walk through what we have here. So we have our git ignore, which is created automatically for you. It's probably going to contain some node modules ignoring. Node modules is basically your folder where all the dependencies are being installed, all the packages. You want to ignore that and not include that into your Git version control, because it's just a lot of packages and anybody using your code can run npm install to install the dependencies themselves. So we can see that we had our node modules folder generated here. We also have this index.js file. So this is going to be your heart of your Firebase functions, because that's where your function is going to run from. So right here, just to show an example, I'm going to uncomment this hello world function. All it's doing, it's importing a module from Firebase Functions called functions. And then it's creating an HTTPS function. So basically what it's going to do is going to create a URL for us to go to. And when we go to that URL, it's going to execute this piece of code. That's like the simplest concept behind Cloud Functions. You can see that it's using functions.logger here. This is kind of a new feature that I also needed to read on when preparing for the event. It's almost equivalent to like your console.logs, but a bit more manageable. And right now, Firebase Functions, like the docs recommend using functions logger because of some different problems that console log introduces. For our example, we are just going to use console log. I'm going to leave the logger one here for now. But in the future functions, you'll see console logs in there, because that works almost the same way. And all what this does is just sends a response with hello from Firebase, and that's what we're going to see in the browser. So yeah, I'm going to save this file. Just a quick overview of what else we have here. So node modules are your just packages. Index.js is your starting point. Package.json and package.log.json are some node specifications, npm specifications about like what this module is about. Is the name of the module, the description of what it does. There are different scripts. I won't go into this. If you want to read on this, I'm sure there's plenty of information on the web about it, but it basically allows you to run some more complex functions simpler. So instead of running this, I could have said like npm run serve, for example, or instead of deploying a function, I could say npm run deploy. That's all there is. So it's not that much code auto-generated, nothing to be afraid of. And you can literally just start coding your functions in this index.js straight away. One thing I'll mention is that, so I kind of talked about what if you skip this installation step of installing the dependencies. If you did skip that, you can go to your functions folder and then run npm install again. npm I or npm install, they're going to work the same way. You can see it's going much faster, and it actually told me that like nothing actually was installed because I already ran npm install. But in case you forgot, it's a very good habit, or something doesn't work, there's no module or something like that, so you can always run npm install. It's pretty simple. Okay, let's actually see this in action. So I'm going to like I'm not going to deploy the function, wait for like a couple of minutes and then test it on a real production environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up some Firebase emulators to test it locally on my machine. So to do that, first I'm going to initialize the emulators. Pretty similar to what we did with functions, but Firebase init emulators is going to initialize the emulators for you in your project. We can see that I already have some of them. The important ones are functions emulator, because that's what's going to emulate your functions. Firestore emulator, because we will use some Firestore triggers. You can include other ones, but those are the most important ones. Yeah, obviously your hosting emulator to also emulate your whole website. So just going to click enter. It's going to ask me about some ports, if I want to install the emulators. If you are including new emulators, please select yes here. But as I already have all the emulators, it won't do anything for me. Cool, I think we're set up. So all what I can do is I can run Firebase emulator start. That's something we run all the time to look at our production website, but locally in development, right? We'll actually see the emulator suites in the in action and see how it helps us to emulate the Firestore and the hosting and functions and all of that. So I can see that I have 3 emulators running right now. My hosting emulator is just hosting my website in localhost 5000. I have my functions emulator, I have my Firestore emulator, everything looks great. So if I just like command click into here, it should spin up the Firebase functions emulator. And all this is basically like your logs of the functions. There's nothing too visual about it. The important statement here is that I can see that my hello world function initialized successfully. So that's great. And it gave me a URL to go to. So if I copy this URL and make a request to that URL, so I'm going to just paste it in my web browser, hit enter. And when this page loads, we will receive hello from Firebase. So where did that come from? When we made a request to that URL, it triggered this function. So on request to HTTPS for this function, we'll have a request and a response object. And request contains all of different parameters that you can pass into the HTTPS function. There's some query parameters you can pass in. I won't go into that. It's basically following the HTTPS protocol. So we should receive a log, and I'm going to go into the emulator suite and look for that. But we also got a hello from Firebase note, so everything worked perfectly fine. If I go back to the emulator, here's our log. You can see it's kind of like a bit more structured than the regular console log, but effectively it does the same thing. Okay, that's perfect. I just created a Firebase function, and it works perfectly fine on my machine. Let's create something more interesting here. So I'm going to create a function that will trigger every time we create a document in our products collection. Let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to do the same thing, export, let's say on products, create. And instead of doing an HTTPS, I'm going to do functions.firestore. That's going to give me different options of what to do. I want to listen for a document change. So I'm going to use this document function, and then I can provide a path to it, so to determine which document to listen on. I want to listen to a document in a products collection, and with some random ID, I don't really care what the ID is. So you can use this curly braces notation to like wildcard your ID. Then I can say product ID. After that, I have a choice of what I want to do. So do I want to trigger this on create, on delete, on update? We're going to go over all of these triggers later on, but for simplicity, I'm just going to say on create here. And now this call receives a callback, the actual function that's going to run. So as you can see here, it needs a snapshot and it needs a context. I'm just going to type it out and then talk about what those are. So snapshots and context. Then we can just define our arrow function here. Just return null because probably won't do anything useful here. So a snapshot is the state of the document when it was created. I can console log the data of the snapshot. And that's going to be basically the JSON representation of the document when it was created. Context, however, contains some useful metadata about the request. So for example, I can fetch the product ID of the document that was created. How can I do that? So I'm going to just log something like product created with this ID. And I can fetch the ID by going context params and then basically the name of this variable. This could be anything. This could be food. This could be bar. Just for better understanding what the code does, I'm going to call this product ID. So context params product ID. I'm going to say like with this data. I'm going to log the data. Cool. I hit save. Cool thing about emulator suite, you don't need to rerun anything, especially if you use JavaScript. That's going to just dynamically update your basically the emulator will watch for updates in your documents, and it's going to see that I created this function, and you can look down here and see that the functions of onProductCreate was successfully initialized and everything is cool. So let's go back to our emulators. I'm going to go to the Firestore tab. And what this tab is basically a copy of our production Firebase environment, but the Firestore environment, but without any data. So you can see the database is blank. But I should be able to create a product collection, then create some documents within it. So I'm going to say something like name, shoe, and give it a price. I don't know, like 123. Save this. Give it some time, and here we go. We have our products collection. We have our document with some random ID. We have a name and a price. So let's go back to our functions emulator, and hopefully we should see some logs here, and exactly this. So we get product created. Here's the ID, which we were listening for. That's what I'm logging in here. And here's the data that was added. So everything worked fine. We can ship this. One last function that I'm going to show is another option for you is also to call these functions from your code. So it's going to be very similar to this HTTPS function, but instead of on request, I'm going to use on call. So basically what this does, these are two different triggers for HTTPS functions. If we are calling our functions from our client code, we can use on call to trigger this, this event here. So I don't need to send anything. I can just, once again, just return null. It's going to work perfectly fine. So I'm just going to console log the data that I get. Let's actually see what this expects, because I don't know this from the top of my head. So it expects just the data and the context. So I'm going to give it that. Once again, the context is the metadata about the call. Data is the actual thing that was passed into the function. So all I'm going to do is just say like console log the data to me. Maybe also something like I was called. Very simple.
You might need to have data.json because it expects an object or JSON specifier of it, but either way.
Let's try it this way. If it won't work, I'm gonna modify it. Yeah, you can do. I think you can do .json. I'm not sure if it's gonna type hint here, but let's see if this works. So I defined my callable function, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my app.js. Here we're initializing our Firebase app in the for our whole client's application. We already have analytics in the database here, so I'm going to add functions. So const functions equals Firebase functions. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the emulators, because by default, all of these are using production data. I want to first test my callable functions with the emulators, confirm everything works, and then kind of deploy my code and test it in the production. So what I can say is Firebase functions, functions, use emulator. I need to provide it the host and a port. So host is localhost, and the port is 5001. How do I know this information? Two places from the docs, and also I can see that my cloud functions are running on localhost 5001, so that's the port that I'm going to provide. Cool. Okay, so I have my functions. They are running on an emulator, but this won't work. Why wouldn't it work? Because if we look in our index.html, you can see that whenever we're using any SDK, any Firestore SDK, Analytics SDK, we need to include a CDN for it, because it won't just appear from thin air. We need to include a CDN to include the library and use it in our code. So I'm going to go to the docs here. This is the section for cloud functions and going into the callable functions. And I'm just going to grab the CDN from this example. This is explaining how to set up the functions in your web environment. And just include it here. Here we have Firebase functions. Should be good. Okay, I have my functions. I have emulators running. CDN is included. Everything is good. What do I do with it? I need to somehow tell my code to call the hello world. Actually, interesting thing. I don't know how this was handled, but I think they should be different. It should be named differently. So I'm going to name this something like my callable function. So how do I do that? How do I trigger this function from code? So on DOM content loaded, so when the website is loaded, I'm going to add the following. I want to get the reference to my function. So I'm going to say my function is equal to, and then I can say functions, HTTPS callable, and then pass the name of the function that I want to reference. Whoops, thought I copied the name. It's going to be my callable function. Now I have a reference to my function, and I can call it, use it as a regular JavaScript function. So what I can do is I can say my function dot, my function, and call it with the parentheses and pass the data that I want to pass to my function. So something like message, load DSC. This will give me a promise with some, like, how the function was called. Did it error out? Did it resolve correctly? This is not an async method. I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to do a .then and console log whatever comes back. So that should be pretty simple. Let's see. So if I save this, I think I should be good unless I did any typos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my localhost 5000 because that's where my website is running locally. Give it a few seconds to load. I'm going to open up my console and see if I did anything wrong. So this is a well-known error that's always been there from the dawn of time. We'll fix that at some point. But the important thing is that we got some response, and this is actually coming from the console log right here. So hopefully now if I go back to the Firebase emulators, I should see that my function was called and the message was hello DSC. So everything went great. So here you go. That's like the 3 simplest functions with different various triggers that you can write just in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to deploy one to show you how to, because everything is running on localhost right now. We already have, I realized we already have like a hello world function, which we were doing from testing. So I'm going to go to my dashboard on functions, and I'm going to delete this. So I'm going to just say delete function. So that's gone. And I can stop my emulators since I confirmed everything. Let's check out our index.js. So I have 3 functions here. I could either like upload them in one shot, or I could deploy one specific one if I want. So let's say I just want to deploy this hello world function. So how do I do that? I can say Firebase deploy. And then I can provide a -- only flag and say functions : the name of the functions I want to deploy. And what that's going to do is going to look into my index.js, into my exports, see that here is a function with this name, and deploy this to my dashboard. So let's run this. Deploying functions will take anywhere from like 1 to 5 minutes, I think, depending on your network connection. My computer is not the fastest one, so you can see that it's creating a new Node.js 12 function of hello world. So hopefully in some near future, we will see it appear in the dashboard. While that's running and deploying, I'm just going to go through the dashboard a little bit in more detail. So you can see that once this loads, well, actually, we can already see it here. So I'm not sure. Maybe it did some caching in the backend or didn't clean the previous function yet. Let's actually wait until this completes, so we're sure that everything is in good health. So the main tab is the logs tab. It's equivalent to our emulators logs tab. Yeah, we can see that the emulator is disconnected, but the logs that are coming through in the emulator, they're kind of emulating this dashboard logs panel. You can see the usage if you want to see how many invocations of your functions were performed, to track maybe some billing, or if there's any spikes that you need to correct anything. It was a very nice view to kind of display how many functions and how often are being invoked. The health tab is if anything crashes within your functions, if your functions don't execute correctly or they don't deploy, anything like that, you will see some entries here. And then the dashboard just lists all your functions in here. So let's see. I think we have it deployed. It already gave us the URL. So this is a HTTPS, no local host. So I can just go here. Yes, I do want to open this link. And here we go. Here's our hello from Firebase. Everything worked fine. This is in production. This is a real URL you can go to and trigger the function. Yeah, that's your path from code to deployment. Just a few steps. I'm actually gonna take down this function just so it's not being invoked unnecessarily. Cool. Okay, let's get back to our slides. We still have quite a bit to cover, so let's kind of speed up and go through this. So here you can see all the CLI commands that we run. The first one is npm install -g Firebase tools. You've run this to install the Firebase CLI. It's all familiar. Then you can initialize your functions and emulators. I've just shown you how to do that. You can go to your functions directory and npm install the dependencies if you haven't when you were initializing it. And then you can spin off your emulators to test them and finally deploy your functions in production. So it's pretty similar. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask, or this presentation will be available after the recording.
And I think Andrew mentioned a little bit earlier that if you're in the functions directory, you can see the package JSON commands, and there they will also have an option for you to run some of these with NPM. So
Exactly.
instead of having Firebase deploy, you can just do NPM deploy, and that would automatically trigger the Firebase deploy dash only functions.
Exactly, yeah. So there's sometimes even easier ways to doing this. We can look into this later on. Okay, Raf, do you want to talk about different types of functions and outside the ones that I've shown in the demo?
Yeah. So Andrew predominantly showed the directly called functions. You also had one of the background triggers, and okay, so start from the beginning. There's three main types of cloud functions that can be ran. There is the ones that you can directly call, and so these are going to be your HTTP requests. That was the Hello World example. Then there's the callable functions, and that was the Hello DSC example. And then there's one that we haven't talked about yet, but this is scheduled functions, and this is going to be what we spoke about a bit earlier, cron, having functions run periodically. There is some background trigger functions. So you can have functions run on analytics events. And something we found out quite recently is that this unfortunately isn't supported for the web just yet, only for iOS and for Android. So if you've got in-app purchases on your apps, you can definitely trigger cloud functions on those events. On the web, not quite yet.
It might, by the time somebody is watching this, they might already be implementation for the web. So definitely check out.
Very much true.
Some of these features are brand new, like literally last half a year new. So.
And they keep updating them.
They keep updating everything
very frequently. It's one of the best things about Firebase. You can also listen to triggers on your Cloud Firestore, and Andrew showed that example when we added an item to the inventory. The same is true for cloud storage and the real-time database or authentication. There's a lot of built-in ties that you can use when users authenticate. And then the last two for the background triggers are remote config and pub sub. We're not going to talk about those predominantly today, but hopefully next week we'll get into that. And then the last vertical is the Firebase extensions. And so these are some cloud functions that have been pre-configured and built by the Firebase team, and they're packaged and they're just given to you for usage. The first one is probably my most, one of my two favorite extensions. Then it's the ability to send emails. Beautifully designed. It really is quite fantastic the way they designed that function. The next one is being able to delete your user's data. So if your user deletes their account and they get deleted from authentication, you want to be able to go into the Cloud Firestore database and delete all of the instances that user appears, and you'll do that by the user's ID. There's some really convenient ones, like being able to resize your images and to translate some text on the page. And then there's some really important ones, like being able to run Stripe payments. So if you're looking to make a payment system, we're not going to demonstrate that, but if you were looking to do a payment system, you would do so through Stripe. And they have a Firebase function called run payments through Stripe already pre-configured for you. Another one would be for MailChimp. As soon as a user authenticates, you can have them added to your MailChimp server so that these emails get put onto your email list, and you can do your promotions, your newsletters, or sales even, for that matter. But what's important to notice is that they've got these three verticals for three different use cases, and these are predominantly going to cover most of your use cases for functions.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, the idea is that you can trigger your functions any way possible you want, like on any events in the Google Cloud or any external APIs, or perform different computationally heavy tasks. So yeah, as Raf mentioned, there's a bunch of extensions that can already, there's a already built solution for you. You don't even need to do anything. Cool, let's keep going. Let's talk about directly called functions. So we touched on this a bit in the demo. But so the first type is like your HTTPS functions, functions that could be called within your code, and also the scheduled functions we will cover in more detail. So,
and could we get an example of where we would use the HTTPS trigger instead of an in-app callable function?
Yeah, an example that I can think of is like a webhook on any third-party API. So let's say every time there is I don't know, somebody sends a message on Slack. You want to trigger something within your Firestore, or like maybe let's say you're doing a Slack integration and you want to buy a product through Slack. Then you need to know what functions to trigger when different Slack commands execute. So you can kind of specify an HTTPS string there, link to your function that will execute when that workflow executes when anybody types a command in the Slack chat.
That's a pretty cool one. I think another one would be maybe even with GitHub. If you've got GitHub issues being made to your repository, you could use that webhook to call your Cloud function and maybe display all the issues on your front end.
Yeah, something like that. It would be nice. So yeah, different use cases for different functions. Just pick the one you like and use it to your liking. Let's look at some examples here. So we have an HTTPS trigger. We already seen that in the code, but basically what it does, it goes into your functions HTTPS, listens to some requests, and responds with different statuses. So let's say we want to know some kind of a product type from our query and then return all the product items, right? So we can get the product type from our request and then trigger, like get some fetch them product items from our Firebase and then respond with those product items to whoever was calling the function with the 200. Or if something went wrong for some reason, maybe the category didn't exist or something, we will respond with a 400. And you can see how we can call this in code. So some service somewhere could just do a fetch to the URL of the function and basically return a data.json of the representation that we responded that would be our product items. So pretty simple, just defining a webhook for your application, and very powerful as well.
And I think this was just quickly, I know, we're not trying to speak too much about the HTTP protocols, but I think just briefly, a 200 means good, things went okay,
yeah.
And a 400 usually means something went wrong on the client side. So for example, you passed in parameters that don't maybe match up with what's being expected. And then I think the last one that's maybe interesting or important to describe is the 500, which would be something on the on the server going wrong. So it's not, particular to this, but it is some useful information.
Exactly, yeah. And you can, there are lists of these codes on the web. You can check out different, maybe you want to send us more specific codes to let your users know what happened wrong, what succeeded, or whatsoever. Oh, right, what's the next one? We have a callable function. So once again, we've seen how to do this in code. You can do functions HTTPS callable, pass the name of the function, and kind of await the results of the instantiation. This is actually another way of doing it, right? Like you can await on the function and then get the results.data from it. Defining this function is almost the same. Like the only difference is this on-call parameter versus in the previous example we had on request. So just listening for different events here. Everything else should be familiar. Then the last one is the more interesting one. Raf, do you want to talk more about it?
Yeah. So an example for this could be, say for example, example twice, sorry, but you wanted to send a newsletter to your subscribers or to your customers in general. Maybe you've got some new products, maybe some products are on sale. You want to run them on a timely basis, and this is where we can use some scheduled functions for. And you can see that we've got functions.pubsub. Pubsub is what's going to be the thing that allows us to have these interval functions. And then we've got the .schedule with a parameter of the scheduling schedule. And I think we could probably give some documentation about this. So I will put one in the chat.
Yeah, if you can drop that in the chat. But the string is basically specifying like how often do you want to send the function.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it goes minutes, hours, days,
It's like
No.
days of which day of month you want, which months do you want, and I think like some day of week or something like that. So it's
Yeah,
basically
so it
specifying the
goes
different.
minute, hour, day of month, month, and then days of week.
Yeah.
So we
So
first specify the minutes, hours.
so the way you
Month.
would read this is like, I want to send this every 0th minute of the 9th hour of any given day of the month of any month, and only on the first day of the week. So this function will run every Monday at 9 a.m. That's your cron job syntax here.
And then we haven't gone into the email functionality yet, but it's really quite simple. So we've just left some boilerplate, and that's where you would send your email, and you could really do anything here. You could run through all of your products and make sure that all your products are up to date, or maybe you want to turn off all of your sales that have been going on for a certain holiday. So for example, everything is going to go on sale just before Thanksgiving. You're going to have Black Friday sales, and then you can have a schedule that runs the day after, which will go through and remove all of those on sale flags. Something like that, for example.
Yep. All right, so let's move on. So the second part is Cloud Firestore triggers, and this is only one part of that huge vertical, right? We are going to display some different triggers. I think we're going to cover some analytics triggers as well. But one of the sections is like listen for your updates on your documents, and we already showed this in demo for the onCreate function. But let's see what other functions look like. So the first two cases are when you add and delete documents. So when you add a new document to your, let's say your products collection, you can use this onCreate hook to trigger your function, and you will get a snapshot in the context. We've seen this. The snapshot data will give you the data of the new document, and the context will contain some metadata about the request, such as like different ID that was passed in or something like that. Anything that was kind of wild-carded in here. Deleting documents is awfully similar. It's basically the only difference is on delete. You will also get a snapshot of the state of the document before it was deleted. Once again, the data provides you the data, and the context contains some metadata about the request. So the final two are on update and on write. So on update is a little bit more tricky because nothing was created or deleted. So what Firebase functions give you is this change object. The change object will contain a change before and a change after. The change before will contain the state of the document before the change was performed. Let's say we changed the name from bag to shirt. So the data in the change before will contain the name of bag, and the change of after data will equal to name of shirt. So it's basically for you to kind of get the information between the two states, between the event was triggered, the state of the database before the event trigger and the after state. The context params are completely the same. They will still contain the ID of the product or any other useful information. So yeah, that's a pretty cool one. And also on write is kind of merging all of those three together. So it will listen on create, on update, and on delete of all of your documents. It's going to contain the change. We're actually going to see this as an example in the code. So if let's say you're using an on write trigger and you're creating a new document, the change before will not exist because the document didn't exist before the event triggered, right? And we will see how to check that in code as well. You would use on write for like, I don't know, actually the good use case is an aggregation functions that both need to trigger on like creates and deletions of documents, right? So you want to increment or decrement your value. Yeah, if you don't want to write like multiple functions and different triggers, you would just use on write to perform your operations. So pretty neat, only like 4 functions to cover all of different Firestore events, and you can trigger any code you want to do this.
I think one other thing that's useful to mention before we leave the Cloud Firestore triggers is that it actually uses the admin database. So whatever we write in terms of Cloud Functions is going to bypass our database rules.
Yeah, exactly.
So you might want to be careful in some situations. In most situations, it's actually an advantage, but in some situations, you might end up overwriting stuff that you would have previously configured a bunch of rules to protect.
Yeah, good point. Right. Probably you want to talk about analytics and how they don't work in the web.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate, but I think that it's still very useful if you've got your mobile application or when they do add it to web. But we'll take an example of users exiting your site. Say, for example, you would like to know when a user has exited your site, did they have items in their cart? And if so, let's send them a promotion. So in this case, we've logged some event user exits when the user exits the site. And then when we actually trigger this Cloud function, we can determine if the user has already been sent a promotional email, a follow-up email, because we don't want to be sending them an email every single time they come to the site and then leave just because they have stuff in their cart. So we first check to see if they have items in their cart, so if their cart length is not 0, and if they've already had a promotion sent or not. If those criteria meet, then we can send them a promotional coupon using our email function. I suppose we're like kind of holding off on this email function. We'll get to it at the end.
Cool.
Analytics, unfortunately, again, doesn't work, but in app development, it would be the exact same way, and you just have to use your app-specific analytics triggers. So if you're going to make custom ones, you can use those custom ones. But something like purchase, keep in mind, is web-specific, whereas in-app purchase is mobile-specific. So you want to be using in-app purchase. That's just an example.
All right. It's demo time. I'm saying we show the one, the only, the email function, and see how the extensions work with Firebase. So if I go to our dashboards and I go to extensions, this is basically where you can include the extensions, and you can see that we have 2 right now. But basically, you can like explore different official Firebase extensions and install whatever you want. So this trigger email extension is what's gonna basically create a few functions for us and send the emails. I won't go into managing the functions because there's going to be some sensitive data there, but what you can configure is like the your mail server you want to send the emails from, or your client that needs to handle those emails and things like that. Different subjects, templates, there's a lot of things you can customize. But the important thing is that it creates, when you configure the extension, it's going to create automatically 2 functions for you, and it's going to be kind of denoted with this Firebase extension icon here. So one is for user delete, which is another extension that we included, and this one is for on documents write to a mail collection. So the way this extension functions is when I go to my Cloud Firestore, I could create this mail collection, and this mail collection will contain all the documents, like as if this was a history of all the mails that were sent to anyone from your app. Then what I can do is I can provide a message with the HTML and the subject, and who do I want to send this message to. When I create this this document, it will automatically trigger the function, send the email, and then also write the delivery to this delivery object to the same document I have created. Actually, what if I just do that? So let's say I want, so the document ID could be anything. 2 will be, I don't know, like test.
I think you might need to specify that it's an array. So even if it's an array of a single value,
Right.
or does it not? I think
You're
it
right.
might need to be.
Because we might want to send different, like a lot of emails at once, right? So the message field will be a map, and we want to specify the subject of anything, then the HTML body of the message. Also, you can customize. Let's try this. Let's save this document. Give it a few seconds, and here we have, like, automatically we got a delivery field created for us. I didn't do that. It's just is the function that was triggered that created this. It probably will say, oh, actually it was accepted. So if there was a test, they received an email from us. Yeah, that's how we send messages. We don't even use any kind of external APIs. We just literally write documents to our Firestore database, and it works.
There is sort of one API that we use, and that's going to be the SMTP server. So that's your email server that you're using, and in our case, it is SendGrid. So if you click on the explore the official Firebase extensions page, I think you open up a tab for it. They do mention this in the actual extension documentation. So over here, you can see all of the different extensions that they have, but you can also view some more detail about each individual one. And here they show that you can specify a SMTP server that you choose. Yep.
It's basically, yeah, different configuration options that you will have.
And if you scroll up just a little bit more, I think they give an examples of which ones they recommend. Yeah, so they say that you can use providers like SendGrid or Mailgun. I'm assuming that MailChimp works as well, but we are using SendGrid, and it's relatively easy. The only things you would need to do is to verify your domain if you are using a domain-specific email. So in this case, we are. So you will verify your domain, and then also to verify your email. So they will send you an email that you'll need to verify the same way you would verify signing up for a website.
Yeah. But that's already, like, that's SendGrid API separate from Firebase, so that's probably why we was covering it in this event. But if you want to go more in depth, or you have any problem setting it up, please drop us a question. All right, I think that's all different types of functions, or at least the most common ones that we wanted to cover. We have about like 10 to 20 minutes left. I'm going to go through the code and show what functions we implemented and like more complex examples of what we have. Let's see what's happening in here. I'm going to discard everything. Then I should be able to give it a few seconds.
I think you can check out the event 6, maybe.
This one?
Yeah.
Still running the. Okay, here we go. I think this is good. I like this. So, as you can see, our index.js is quite a bit larger. I'm just gonna kind of collapse the functions so we can see them in all their beauty. So we have quite a lot here. The first one that I really want to go over is this update inventory size. And what this does is if we go back to our Cloud Firestore, this was something I was talking about earlier in the event. If we go to any kind of product, let's say to bags, you'll see that we have an inventory size of 3 here. And this inventory size should dynamically update whenever we add a new document to our collection. So how do we do that? We basically listen to any writes to any category of a product in its inventory subcollection of any product ID. So what does that mean? I want to listen to the products collection, either bags, hats, shirts, or shoes. I don't care. I want to listen to all of them. I want their inventory subcollection specifically, and then any kind of product. I also don't care what that product is. And I'm listening on writes. So it's going to be both all of my update, delete, create operations. So let's go line by line and see what happens here. So first of all, we're checking if this change before and change after exists. So if both of the versions of my file existed before the change and after the change, that's probably an update operation, right? Like somebody renamed the name or changed the price in the document. If somebody modified a document, our inventory size will not change. So I'm just going to return nothing. I'm just going to terminate my function. So now we know that either the before state did not exist or the after state did not exist. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the category document reference. And this is a tricky one as well, because I want to get the reference to my bags document. Because right now I'm listening to any operations that are happening to my products. So the change after will actually point to my product. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying the change after, I want the reference to this document. And I want to get its parent's parent. So its parent will be the collection reference, and then the collection reference's parent will be the bags or whatever the category is. So now I have the reference to my category document. So one of these guys. After that, I will just get my category documents because I don't care about the reference, I care about data. And actually not true, because we will need to update the inventory size, but for now I just want to know the current inventory size. So the old inventory size is basically either if it exists, so if it existed before, it's going to be the inventory size that it's specified there. If it didn't exist, it's going to be 0. So let's say we're like creating a brand new category and inventory size is not there. I just want to consider it being 0 at that point.
I think this is a good point in time to just mention like one of the possible errors that people might run into.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to talk about this.
I think you're referring to like nullish collisions.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're running in a Node 12 environment, which does not support the latest JavaScript standards. We showed some complex syntax in the last episode, for example, when you can do like question mark dot to have nullish optional chaining, or you can do double question marks. This might not work depending on your Node version. So be careful with that. That's why we're kind of not using this syntax here. And yeah, if you deploy a function with that syntax, it's just going to give you some errors at that point. Cool. So yeah, we have our old inventory size. And now to determine the new inventory size, I need to understand, is it a create operation or is it a delete operation? If it's a create operation, then the before will not exist. So we'll get this case. So if there is a create operation, we need to increase the inventory size. If it was a delete operation, then the before exists, this parameter will be true. So we'll decrease our inventory size. And that's how we determine what to do, decrement or increment. And finally, after that, we can basically update our inventory size to the category document reference and with a new inventory size, and everything will be great. Yeah, so that's your complex example of a Firestore trigger, but still very powerful to kind of keep track of how many documents you have in a collection.
One more thing, I really hate to tell you this now, but just this morning I found a Firebase extension which does this.
Great, here you go.
Sorry
I didn't need to even write all of this.
Okay, so we've got a question over here. So Ahmed is asking, hello, I'm an Android developer and I hope to use Firestore in my next project and implement some features that use Cloud Functions. I don't have any experience using Node.js. I'm trying to get started with it. What can you recommend?
Great question. I mean, if you're one thing about like Cloud Firestore and Cloud Functions is that the API is available, like the API reference is available for any kind of platform you're writing for. I would recommend starting with what you're most familiar the most familiar with as a language. So if you're an Android developer, go away with your Java or Kotlin and just use your Android APIs for same thing. You can connect your emulators, you can run your Cloud Functions, all of what we're doing right now in this web environment, Node.js environment, could be done on any other client because the APIs exist for different platforms and for both Android, iOS, desktop applications, Unity, like C++, whatever you're most comfortable with. Pick your language and just learn the APIs and how to use them. That would be my recommendation.
And then in terms of not having much experience using Node.js or NPM for that matter, it's really not that big of a deal, especially for Cloud Functions, because things are so well contained internally. The only thing that you would really need to understand is NPM install. Pretty much that's it. You can write your functions in any language you want, and if you've got your Firebase CLI installed, you wouldn't even need to run an NPM command like npm run or npm serve. You would just need to run Firebase deploy or Firebase emulators start. So I wouldn't be too concerned about learning NPM and Node.js just yet if all you're looking to do is do Android development. However, if you are looking to get some experience with Node.js and with NPM, I'm sure that we could add some documentation or some links to good documentation in the site. I think within the site, we do have a link for resources. So what we'll do for you is just add some places that we think you could go to get some more information about that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're running low on time. I say we cover one more function because there is a lot and you can explore them in your own time. But Raf, I'm going to give you a choice of one function to cover. We'll go through it. And then,
okay. I mean, personally, I'm partial to the send promotion function just because even though it doesn't work, it's elegant in the sense that, it drives user engagement.
Sure.
And I suppose that's what we want as developers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to kind of go over this?
So in this case, this is a function that will trigger on an analytics event. And so what we've done is we've hooked onto this add to cart function. This would be perfect if you've got a mobile app. But we take a look at the cart total of this user. So we know that the user's got items in their cart until they purchase, and at which point those items will be removed. And so we get those items and then we sum up the value in them to get a total for the cart. And then once we have this cart total, we can then see on line 122 if the cart total is greater than 500. So this could really be any value that you choose, but we're just trying to say that you've got a decent sized cart, so we're going to offer you a promotional coupon. The first half of the if statement, though, is to check whether or not the promotion's been sent before. You don't want to be sending promotions to the same person multiple times. So this is just a flag we have on the document that says whether or not the promotion's been sent. And then within the function, once we decide we are going to send the promotional letter, we'll just specify that on the document, so we'll update it. And then we'll add a document into our mail collection. And so this is how we are actually sending emails. We're not specifying any specific SMTP protocol and sending it manually. All we're doing is adding a document into our collection, and our Firebase function, the extension, will do everything for us, which is really like the most elegant way to send mail I have ever seen. I've done it traditionally through the SendGrid API, which is easy, but not as easy as this. This is quite something.
Yeah, and the nice thing is as well that you will get this, you will store all of these documents for future reference, right? Like if you want to see all your documents in your database and then maybe do some statistics or like show them on your client, you can do that. That's already in your Firestore, and you don't even need to like use any APIs for it, right?
And I mean, if you think about it, you could, in essence, make a chat application. You could build a Gmail in a website.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, depending on how well you use this and, the tolerance that you're willing to accept for Firebase function invocations, you could do some very powerful things with an extension like this.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. This was a good example to show how to send an email with the mail extension. And also, hopefully, when they add the support for web event triggers for analytics, this would trigger every time we add something to our cards, and the card's amount, the price value of the card exceeds $500 or any kind of value that you want to specify, and triggers this email with a coupon for our users.
I mean, we do the same thing for purchasing, and the purchasing works for sure, because in that sense, we're not using an analytics event trigger, we're using a Firestore document write. And so we've already spoken about the document writes, and we're already over time, so we wouldn't want to keep you more than what you need to be here. But it's the same idea. It's just on write, or on create rather.
Yeah, so like on create product of on create of a document in the purchase collection, you would also send an email, like just a kind of confirmation of your order, a thank you message, just for your reference. That's a very nice thing to have in an e-commerce website. But yeah, that's pretty much your functions. There is a bunch more that if you want to explore it, they're in the event 6 functions branch. If you want to include yours or have suggestions, because you can see that like possibilities are endless, right? You can have functions that trigger in different events, or if you have an idea, like a business idea or a logical thing you want to implement for our website, we more than encourage you to go and create a pull request and add a function. It's actually a very nice way to contribute as well, because it's basically an independent bit of code. You don't need to even know how our code base is structured, right? You can literally include your function and that's it. That could do something useful. So yeah, feel free to do that.
We're either going to put the link to the website up. So we're going to deploy the website, and it's going to be what you see now with the latest code. And if you would like to, just tinker around and, add items to your own shopping cart and make some dummy purchases, then, you can see those emails coming to your own account, for one, and two, it will give you some intuition about how the code works, and hopefully then you could be prompted to maybe go into the code and make some advancements or make some incremental improvements.
Yeah. I think that's all we have prepared for you this time. If you have any questions, please drop them either right now or in Discord later during the week. We're free to answer those. Maybe hop on a chat with you and go through some code. Love to do that. Yeah, if you have anything else, Raf, do we want to mention the next week's event?
Yeah, so relatively sad. Next week is going to be our last event. So we're going to have a brief introduction to A/B testing and remote config. I'm not sure how much of it we'll be able to implement and demonstrate, but we would love to at least show you some of that and the abilities that you can, have using A/B testing and remote config. We are also going to be having on a Firebase engineer.
Very special guest.
Very, very, very special guest. Really awesome guy. And we'd love to have as many of you with your friends and your family and your pets as possible.
Prepare.
We'd love to see your dogs.
Yeah.
So please share it if you can, and come up with some really interesting questions. I know that I have some very interesting questions. I'm sure Andre does. But it's an amazing opportunity, and I'm appreciative, and I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that you are too. So,
yeah, exactly. I'm pretty excited for that. So, yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Once again, if you have any questions, drop them in either here or in the Discord. Think outside the valley, and I guess we'll see you next week.
And thank you to Dalton for orchestrating things.
Yeah, shout out Dalton.
Well. Shout out Dalton for sure.
Dalton is on the back end.
All right. Well, have a good weekend, everyone.
Cool. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Get ready for a cloud-first workplace. Jumpstart your career by signing up for a Google Cloud hands-on learning experience. Companies around the world are moving to the cloud. This is a unique opportunity to gain new skills and professional credentials. If you want to discover a career, scale your startup, or perform groundbreaking research that will change the world, this is the event for you.